Please be seated. Jesus withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. A deserted place. In our busy and endlessly connected world, I sometimes wonder if there are any such places left. Deserted places. I mean, when was the last time you experienced absence so completely that you knew what it simply meant to be alone? Not lonely. We all know loneliness far too well. We worry about missing out, the party we weren't invited to, the gathering everyone else seems to have attended, the experience social media reveals only after it's already happened. No, I mean being truly alone. Undistracted, unhurried, with nothing demanding your attention except what is actually before you. This morning, I want to tell you two stories of abundance in the wilderness from my recent travels out west. I've just returned from a week of backcountry camping beneath a sky so wide it made me feel so wonderfully small. Resting in the shadow of Mount Baker, deep in the Cascade Mountains, the horizon stretched further than my eyes could behold. And at night, the stars seemed so close, you could almost touch them. Out there, you begin to notice things we usually miss. The rhythm of the wind, the patience of ancient trees, the silence that is never really silent, and the surprising abundance hidden in places where we are too quick to call empty or deserted. We often imagine that the wilderness is a place of scarcity, a place where there just isn't enough. One morning, we climbed onto an ancient glacier, my first time ever traversing one, wearing steel crampons strapped to my boots, an ice axe in one hand and a trekking pole in the other. I was roped together with 4 companions so that if one of us slipped into a hidden crevasse, the others might arrest the fall. And it felt like a totally foreign other world, a landscape of rock, snow, and ice, where winter never truly ends. Refreshing when you're in the midst of a hot season and looking for respite. And yet, as dawn slowly spread across the glacier, I was astonished by how much life surrounded us. Tiny alpine birds darted across the rocks. Hardy wildflowers blossomed in cracks where I could scarcely imagine enough soil to sustain them. Alpine butterflies flittered here and there. Marmots whistled from the slopes below. Even here, where everything appeared barren, life flourished. But the greatest surprise was still beneath my feet. Because on a glacier, your eyes spend most of the day looking down, for every step matters. One careless placement of a crampon can send you sprawling, or, as I painfully discovered in the first few minutes, slice open the back of your calf. Those steel spikes are incredibly sharp. So as I carefully watched each step, I began to notice tiny little black threads scattered across the white ice. At first, I thought they were bits of volcanic ash, or maybe pine needles blown in by the wind. But then I got to thinking. So during one of our breaks, I asked our guide if I was seeing what I thought I was. Ice worms? I asked. He smiled. Yep. I'd heard about years ago from a science story that they existed, these ice worms, but I assumed they were more legend than reality, and at the very least, invisible to the human eye. But there they were, tiny worms, no longer than a paperclip, the smallest paperclip you can imagine, spending their entire lives inside solid glacial ice. They emerge in the cool hours of morning and evening to feed on snow algae and microscopic bacteria before retreating beneath the surface as the day warms. Who expects to find worms living in a glacier? I didn't. If you had asked me what a glacier was before last week, I would have said beautiful, dangerous, frozen, and indeed lifeless. And I would have been wrong. The scriptures always tell us a different story. Again and again, the wilderness is where God reveals abundance. Manna appears where there are no fields. Water springs from a rock. Ravens feed a prophet. And today, in what Matthew calls a deserted place, 5 loaves and 2 fish become a feast for thousands. Perhaps the miracle begins with learning to see the wilderness not as empty, but as full of God. What looks like a barren expanse might have enough food for 7 billion iceworms, just teeming invisibly beneath the surface. And so it gives me pause. Where have my assumptions led me astray? Where have we trained ourselves to see scarcity where abundance reigns? I wonder where your vision may be clouded by your assumptions this morning. One assumption I had shattered involved mountain wilderness. Like Jesus, I thought I was going to a deserted place, largely by myself. But like Jesus, I discovered great crowds. I'm sorry to say the mountain wildernesses are actually quite busy places in the summertime. There are constant troops of people venturing out to summit the mountain, which means that to keep the place pristine, you have to pack out everything you bring with you, all the wrappers from your dehydrated meals, as well as the post-digested remains of said meals. But that's a story of abundance I really don't want to tell this morning. The second story of abundance centers on one of the younger members of our expedition, a 22-year-old from New Jersey named Askar. Every group has one lovable person who never quite gets in step with everyone. Akshar was ours. He spoke in a constant stream of youthful slang, always seemed to be running on his own timetable. And despite repeated reminders, he kept leaving food in his tent instead of storing it in the special bear and rodent-proof sacks that we buried under rocks, along with the digested remains of our meals under a different set of rocks. The first night, the mice found his tortillas. The next night, after he moved his tent, proving that ancient thing that wherever you go, there you are, the marmots found everything else. They didn't just eat his food, they shredded his tent, and enticed by the prospect, cut into 3 more tents. But by the second morning, he had almost nothing left to eat, except a lonely can of SpaghettiOs. Living in community, even a temporary one high on a mountain, comes with both challenges and gifts. You see, each of us had packed our food with almost mathematical precision. Calorical intake mapped out on a spreadsheet to ensure that the 5 nights, 6 days were sustained with just the precise right amount of fuel. Because we didn't want to carry any extra ounce of weight on our backpacks, which were already 60 pounds heavy. Which meant, of course, that none of us had much to spare, or so we thought. One person offered an extra breakfast, another shared a freeze-dried dinner, someone else had an energy bar, another a packet of tortillas, and yet another discovered oatmeal they probably weren't going to eat anyway. None of us had enough, but together there was more than enough. And Akshar never went hungry. Bringing the feeding of the 5,000 into a fresh expression, I couldn't help but think that perhaps this is how many of Jesus' miracles work. We tend to imagine that God brings something, abundance, out of nothing. That's something that didn't exist before. But perhaps the deeper miracle is that Jesus teaches us to see abundance where we have trained ourselves to notice only scarcity, to expect only not to have enough. The disciples looked at 5 loaves and 2 fish and they saw not enough. Jesus looked at the exact same 5 loaves and 2 fish and saw more than enough. The food did not change first. Their vision did. On the glacier, I assumed frozen meant lifeless, and I was wrong. In our camp, we assumed just enough meant there wouldn't be enough to share. We were wrong. In the gospel, the disciples assumed a deserted place meant scarcity. they were wrong. Again and again, God invites us into places that we fear are empty, only to reveal that they've been overflowing with grace all along. Perhaps that is why Jesus often leads people into the wilderness. Not because God is absent there, but because in the wilderness, all of our illusions are stripped away. There are no shopping carts to fill, no endless notifications to distract us, no carefully curated images telling us what we lack. There's only the quiet, the hunger, the company of strangers, and the possibility that God has already provided more than we can yet see. The miracle of feeding the 5,000 is not simply that everyone ate until they were full. It is that a frightened and anxious community learned that the economy of God does not begin with scarcity. It begins with trust. It begins with blessing. It begins with sharing. And I wonder this morning, where have you already decided there isn't enough in your life? Where have you concluded that your relationship, your marriage, can't be healed? That your family cannot be reconciled? That our church cannot grow? That your generosity won't matter? That your gifts are too small? Or maybe your prayers too weak? Where have you mistaken the deserted place for a God-forsaken place? What glaciers in your own life have you declared lifeless, when beneath the surface God is already at work? Who around you is hungry, not only for bread, but for hope, forgiveness, for companionship, for someone just to notice them? And what if the miracle God is waiting to perform begins not by creating something new, but by opening your eyes to what's been there all along? 5 loaves, 2 fish, a glacier filled with life, a frightened camper fed by friends, a deserted hillside overflowing with 12 baskets left over. Perhaps abundance has never been God's problem. Perhaps our vision has been. So this morning, may Christ open our eyes to recognize God's abundance where we expect scarcity, to trust God's provision where we fear there is not enough, and to become ourselves the hands through which Christ continues to bless and to break and to give to a hungry and needy world. Amen.